Robert, I have a question for you on this episode of Real Estate Chat.
Oh,
Oh,
please tell.
yes. Yes. Why did detached home in the 416 drop 17.44% February 2023, while detached homes in the 905 dropped 21.45%? That is what we will be discussing on this episode of Real Estate Chat with
Robert Eden.
and John Perez. So many of you living in either 416 or 905, 905 being such a vast area, know that there is a disparity in terms of the prices, how they went up and how they went down. And so one of the things that Robert and I were chatting about was, what is the reason for the 905 dropping so much relative to the 416? And what I have hypothesized was during the pandemic, there was a big rush to go into the 905 area for various reasons. Number one, home prices in the 416 areas were kind of pricey. Number two, when work from home, that whole thing started, it didn't matter where you lived anymore. All of a sudden, if you lived in a condo in the 416 and the 905 home looked attractive and you didn't have to commute into work, you didn't have to drive, guess what? You could just sell your condo for 500, 600,000, buy a detached home for 700, 800,000. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying these prices and so many other details. And so what we're going to look at today is the comparison of detached home prices in particular, just to show you the 416-905 comparison. And then Robert will talk about the 416-905 price up and down disparities and why 905 is tanking faster than the 416. Robert, anything you wish to add before we start getting into these charts here?
No, let's proceed. I think it's important that we look at this because we always get the Toronto average and never do we get a breakdown on the two differences.
All right, so let's look at 416-905 on screen here. So this is going back to February 2014, and it's comparing just February. So annualized Feb 2014 all the way to February 2023. And you see there, this is average price itself. And we just isolated detached. You can look at this at semis, towns, condos, perhaps it's a future episode. But you'll see that the detached home prices in 416 has always historically been higher than 905 as a whole. Keep in mind, 905 is vast, right? It includes many different regions, if you want to call it that. But if you're looking strictly as living in the city, living in the suburbs, this would be it. And so you're starting at 2014 with home prices sitting at 955. Then you peak out at the first peak happened to be 2017 at 1.573, then dips. And then you see the February 2022 peak, at 1.71 before it dropped. Now, if you're looking at 905, 905 started in February 2014 at 640. Peaked in 2017 at 1.1, then dipped. February 2022 peak was 1.7, and then dipped. Now, these are just average prices, but let's look at what it works out to in terms of percentage changes. And so when you're looking at the percentage changes going up to the peak, you saw this first big bump up in percentage change increase. So in 2017, while the 416 detached homes went up almost 30%, 29.89% to be exact, the detached homes in the 905 jumped 35.45%. Now, again, look at the average price, look at the percentage change. Is there a reason for it? That's what we're going to talk about. Now, during the dip, 416 dipped a bit more than 905 in Feb 2018, 18%, 18.5% down compared to 17.64. It's almost negligible. It's not really that big of a difference. Now, on the way up to peak, February 2022, again, detached homes, 416 up 23.15%, while detached homes in the 905 went up 32.83%, which brings us to today, Robert. The reason why detached homes dropped only 17.44% in 416 versus 21.45% in the 905 area. So, Robert, why don't you bring your explanation on board and we'll come to the conclusion of why this happened.
Okay. Well, Jonder's bar chart was good in that it starts in 2014 and continues to today because it's all one cycle. The people who are looking at strictly a one-year change are forgetting, go back to Jonder's chart, are forgetting what happened in 2017. In 2017, we had a speculative boom going where people were buying everything, buying anything. And it was so crazy that they introduced the stress test because they knew that rates were low, and they knew that people were buying spec properties or buying properties that they're going to rent out. They're going to buy properties that are going to flip before they ever close them. They were not going to be owner occupants of them. And then on March the 16th, I believe, of 2017, maybe March the 20th of 2017, the government of Ontario introduced 16 different measures to quell the speculative boom of the real estate market. And guess what? It worked. And so it knocked the stuffing out of all the spec buyers. And again, we have first-time buyers, we have investors, we have trade-up buyers who are selling one house to buy another, and we have last-time sellers who are cashing out and going to a retirement home. Those are the components of the real estate market. So they got knocked out by these 16 things because it affected rental property, and that's what they were buying them for, to rent them. There were now not going to be new rental units they could charge any kind of a rent for. It was now going to be rent control. A lot of things happened all on that March 17th, and it's knocked the stuffing out of it. Then we had this threat of death and emergency lockdown, which changed everything. And as a reaction to the emergency lockdown, they dropped the rates like crazy to 0.25. That's a ridiculous rate. You cannot have an economy with interest at, but they had it, dropped it down. So guess what? As soon as people were able, fortunately, real estate was declared an essential service, so they couldn't be shut down. You couldn't be like a small restaurant, you just can't open. We could still operate. But everyone was afraid, oh, you're going to poison me with your breath. Anyway, finally, when that calmed down, the speculative boom resumed because people said, well, you know what? If I've got interest at 2% and inflation at 2%, it's free money. I'm going to borrow as much as I possibly can because I know real estate. I don't understand the stock market. I don't understand bonds, but I can have one tenant and I can rent it to one tenant and I can handle that from an administrative standpoint. So they bought like crazy and the prices started to go up. And so when the prices started to go up, they said, oh, I can only qualify for 950,000. Where can I buy what I want for 950,000? Or I'm a homeowner and I now can work from home, as John said. Where can I buy exactly what I want, sell my condo, get rid of my rental? I can only pay $850. Where can I go? And so it's spread out, buying everywhere. And that's why we're wrong to say it's 905, because it's Durham, it's York, it's Mr. and Mrs. Saga, it's Halton. It actually goes out to, I don't think we're reporting in our in our TREB zone, Burlington and Hamilton, but those prices went crazy too. Why? Because they were cheaper. And now you got Toronto buyers. That used to happen in Pickering, where people would go out the GO train, buy in Pickering, and the locals will say, who paid 68,000 for that junk? It should be like 58,000. A Toronto buyer came and thought it was cheap. That's the same thing that happened all the way across. So you have uninformed people going to zones that they don't understand, Kitchener-Waterloo, Hamilton, all through, up to East Gwillimbury, buying houses on spec, and they seem cheap compared to the Toronto prices. So it's a speculative boom. It kept going until they changed the game on interest rates, and they started cranking up the interest rates. And guess what happened? All those people lost enthusiasm. Now we're seeing in every one of our episodes, we talk about guys who can't qualify anymore. Buyers who can't swing the financing, so they want to blow on the deal. The pre-constructions that can't be satisfied. The poo has not all hit the propeller, because many of these are long lead times. It's not till the closing that the poo really hits the propeller. However, 416 was already built. You have a little bit infill, and so it went up because that's where people really want to be. There's always demand for what people really want. And when you got specs and when you got optional buyers out to the fringe, that they say, well, I'm not going to pay that much for that in Clarington anymore. I'm not going to pay that much in East Gwillimbury anymore. And so only the ones that get sold are the ones that are at an advantageous price. And that's what we report. That's what our average prices are, the ones that get sold. Now, this one here is the same thing, except monthly, every single month, not just February's. And you can see the cycle going up. Most of the time, the blue line is 905. Most of the time, 416 is more than 905 until about 2/3 of the way along there in the 20. We had a boom there, but it went crazy in 905. Again, the outlying suburbs where things were cheaper, where you could buy a 3,000 square foot house for $1 million. Now you have to pay 1.5. So the prices went up because they were available at the price that people could pay. And then the stuffing got knocked out of it by interest rates. So down it came. So we're going to find an equilibrium. I had another chart which will come out where we're taking, if interest rates are 4%, if interest rates are 5%, if interest rates are 6%, if interest rates are 70%, what's the equivalent to the monthly payment that somebody would have paid at the peak at 2%? And so you come up with the monthly payment is where all these buyers' brains really are, which is true. And so what do interest rates have to go down to in order to get back up to the peak? And they have to get down to 2%. And guess what? They're not. So we're never going to get to 1.3 as an average price because we're not going to get to 2% interest. So what are we going to do? This is the question for the age. Okay, so here's sales, same thing. You know, you don't get prices without sales. Sales drive up prices. And you don't get sales unless people are incented to buy. And if you're incented to buy interest rates, the interest rate drops to 0.25%. And then some said, oh, yes, we have low interest rates. They're very low and it's going to be low for a very long time. People relied on that. They bought like crazy. And then all of a sudden says, oh, we have to change that. It's not going to be for a long time. It's going to be, we're going to change it all in the course of 8 months. And we'll raise prices from 0.25 to 4.25. And you're going to have to adjust to it and not worry about it. It's not our problem. It's your problem. You caused it. This typifies exactly what's happening with statistics. That if you blend too many things that are not the same together, you lose focus. The national statistics don't tell you what's happening in Toronto. And really, the Toronto statistics don't tell you what's happening in 416 anymore, because 905 is an influence far greater. 60% of the sales that are reported by Trev are in 905. So 40% is 416. 416 is actually doing pretty good. 905 has got a big problem. It's got a problem like the rest of the speculative areas that we'll maybe get into another time. Why did people pay so much for that in Bolton?
Well, that's the biggest question, right? I mean, you said it best earlier when it came to cheap money, low interest rates, low prices. It was a mix. It was a concoction of things that was bound to explode at some point. And so anybody that, you would have never thought would be saying, oh, this town name and that town name, and towns I've never even heard of. And you've told me about these towns. A couple of episodes of Real Estate Chat, we talked about the drop of Skookog, right? How much that dropped. And this is just the prime illustration of what has happened. And so if you're watching this episode of Real Estate Chat, click on subscribe, click like. If you dislike this episode, click dislike. Put your comments into what you think about 416, 905 buying, what the prices are, where they're headed, what you feel about that, and what you feel about anything that we talked about. So we'll see you in the next episode of Real Estate Chat. Bye for now.
See you.